Hello and welcome back to the second reading of our class novel, Light on Dumyat. As you'll hopefully remember, when we left Gavin at the end of chapter 2, he was in his bedroom and had just spotted the light on the hill and was wondering what it was. So chapter 3, the search begins. Gavin raced downstairs the next morning and burst into the kitchen. "Good morning," he shouted. Aunt Elspeth swung around from the stove. Betty, the home help, looked up from setting the table and smiled at the eager figure. "I see you're ready to explore," said his aunt. She studied him. He was wearing his green anorak, a khaki open neck shirt, long trousers tucked into long socks, and his new boots. His boots were folded down over the top of his boots. Gavin had seen this in a picture in the mountaineering shop. He thought it very dashing. On his back was his rucksack. Earlier, he had laid his equipment out on his bed and checked it. He'd made a list in a hard-covered notebook he had brought to write down the names of any new birds he saw. He printed 1 torch and spare battery, 1 cagoule in case there was heavy rain, 1 compass, 1 map, 1 knife, 1 whistle, 1 bird book. He scored each one off as he put it in his rucksack. As he tucked into his breakfast, Aunt Elspeth questioned him on his journey. "I'm going to the top of Dumyat," said Gavin, his mouth full of toast. "Oh, you are you?" said Aunt Elspeth. "What route do you take him?" "What route?" Gavin paused. Oh, he'd not planned a route. He was simply going to walk through the woods and then try to find the easiest way to the top. Aunt Elspeth saw him hesitate. "Once you've finished your breakfast and seen the house, I'll show you how to plan a route on your map. Don't worry, we'll go around the house quickly and then you can be off. Besides, you've got to meet your Uncle Fergus." She handed him a flask of tea, a packet of sandwiches and some fruit. Gavin put them in his rucksack and adjusted the straps. It sat very well on his back, nice and tightly. "It's best to keep your rucksack fairly tight," said Aunt Elspeth. "Then it won't swing about and bump you. Come on, let's go and say hello to Uncle Fergus. He's working in the library." Gavin was so excited thinking about the mysterious light that he paid little attention to the house. He vaguely remembered passing through large rooms and along dim corridors. Then Aunt Elspeth opened the door to the library. Gavin gasped. The walls were covered in shelves of books. A row of antlered deer heads were fastened to one wall, but it was not these things that took his breath away. A large table stood in the middle of the floor, and it was covered in silver ornaments. There were plates and cups and stemmed objects like vases, all piled up in a glittering heap. A tall man with a beard got up from the desk and came towards them. "You must be Gavin," he said, shaking Gavin's hand. "Hello," said Gavin, politely. Uncle Fergus smiled kindly at him. "I'm afraid I won't see much of you this week. Aunt Elspeth has probably told you that I'm writing a book about the ancient silver treasures of Scotland. I hope to have most of my work done soon, and after that we'll have some fun." "Yes, Uncle Fergus," said Gavin. "Thank you very much," he said. "But can I ask you a question?" "Certainly," said Uncle Fergus. "Ask me anything you like, but I can guess it'll be about the silver. It always has that effect on people." "Did the silver for these objects come from the Ochils?" asked Gavin. Aunt Elspeth said there were old mines in the hills. Uncle Fergus nodded. "Centuries ago, some objects were made of silver from here, but the silver was quickly used up. The old miners also looked for gold, but didn't find any. Not very many ornaments were made. I have 2 here, both on loan from museums." He lifted up 2 shallow bowls with little handles at each end. "What are they?" Gavin asked. "They're ancient quakes," said Uncle Fergus. Then, seeing Gavin still looking a bit puzzled, he went on. "They were used for ceremonial drinking, for toasts and so on." He picked up another. It had a fragile, battered appearance. "This may be a chalice. It might have come from a church. That is one of the things I'm trying to find out. Gavin looked again at the glittering array. There were cups, bowls, plates, cutlery. He thought he saw a pistol. Uncle Fergus picked it up and put it down again inside a wooden box. Very valuable, he said with a smile. A unique specimen of a Scottish Doon pistol faced with silver. Is it all valuable? Asked Gavin. Supposing somebody stole it. It's very valuable, all right, said Uncle Fergus, but no one is going to steal it here. No one knows I have the museum pieces in the house, other than the museum officials, that is, and the rest of the silver is our own. It belonged to the family. It's been here for centuries. It's locked up each night in our safe. He pointed to a large safe in the corner. Besides, he went on, the library windows are barred. The windows to the outside door are kept in my study each night. He returned to his desk. Gavin could see that Uncle Fergus wanted to get on with his work, so he said goodbye and walked towards the door. Just above the door was a large oil painting. The light from the library window glinted on it, so Gavin stepped sideways to get a better look. It was a very dramatic picture. It showed a group of Highlanders in bright red tartan standing in a ring around a torn flag. They were being attacked by hundreds of soldiers. Most of the Highlanders were wounded. What's that? He asked Aunt Elspeth. She glanced up. Oh, that's a painting of the Clan MacRae at the Battle of Sheriff Muir. The battlefield is not far from here. We can visit if you like. The MacRae clan came from far in the northwest from an area known as Kintail. She continued. They had a boast that they never left a battlefield while their flags still flew. At Sheriff Muir they stayed when their comrades fled and were killed to a man. Gavin blinked. What a fierce lot they were hundreds of years ago. Picts fighting Romans and driving them back. Highlanders dying for the sake of a flag. It was difficult to believe it had all happened in these quiet hills. That's enough of touring the house, said Aunt Elspeth. Come on downstairs and I'll show you how your map works. She and Gavin went out of the front door and knelt down on the lawn. Gavin spread out his new map. Get your compass out, said his aunt. Gavin laid it on the grass and watched while the needle quivered backwards and forwards and then stopped. He turned the compass slowly until the needle was in line with the little N that pointed north. Well, what you do now is to make sure the top of your map sheet is also at the north. She pushed the map around until the top edge was beside the north sign on the compass. Remember, she said, the top of your map is always north. Now, the next thing to do is work out a route. Gavin and his aunt bent over the map. If you go through the woods, a path will bring you out to an old zigzag road that will lead you to the top of a small hill called Craigomas. It is called that because people used to dig peat there. If you say the name slowly, you'll see why. Gavin tried it. Craig-o-Mas. Craig-o-Moss. Craig of the Moss, he asked. Good, said his aunt. Always try to find out the meaning of place names. It is interesting, and it can sometimes help you to identify a place if you're lost. She went on. From the top of Craigomas, you walk down the glen, cross the burn, and then go straight up the side of Dumyat. Gavin peered at the brown, green and blue markings on the map. It seemed so confusing. His fingers traced out the places. When these brown lines are far apart, it means the ground is not too steep, said Aunt Elspeth. When they are close together, then it is steep. Look at these lines and then have a look at the hills once you are through the woods. There's Dumyat there, she continued. See where the brown lines, they're called contour lines, come together, and then where the top is indicated. See, the name is marked and the height. It's over 400 metres and you can see for miles. A few miles into the hills beyond Dumyat, the peaks rise up over 800 metres. I was worried about you going off into the hills on your own, said Aunt Elspeth, but I don't think you'll go wrong. Dumyat is easily found and there's no mist today. You seem to have plenty of sense, and I've been everywhere you're going. It's quite safe. Normally it is wise to go exploring or climbing with other people, she went on. Then, if there is an accident, someone can go for help. Otherwise, if you must go on your own, leave a note of your route with somebody else. Gavin jotted down these points. His aunt watched him methodically stow his notebook and pencil away in the pocket of his rucksack. Gavin felt he was starting to enjoy himself. Then a thought struck him. Aunt Elspeth, does anybody live on Dumyat? His aunt laughed. Good grief, no. They'd be blown off in the winter. The only homes up there belong to the jackdaws. They rest in old rabbit burrows. You might see them. If you're lucky, you might also see a peregrine falcon. There's one about. A falcon? Examined Gavin. What is it like? He fumbled in his pocket and drew out the bird book. He flicked over the pages until he came to an illustration of a hawk with a grey back and wings, a wicked-looking hooked beak and fierce yellow eyes. Gavin read, inhabits lonely hills and moorland. What a find! What a bird to start his new list with! Then birds faded from his mind. Auntie, he exclaimed again, would anyone climb Dumyat in the dark? In the dark, said his aunt. No, not unless they were staying up all night to see the sunrise, or they were lost. Gavin pondered for a moment. Surely people wanting to see the sunrise wouldn't climb a hill in the early evening. What could those lights mean? Anyway, there was only one way to solve the mystery. Saying goodbye to his aunt, he set off down the path that led through the woods. His search for the mysterious light had begun. Chapter 4. The Falcon and the Fire. The peregrine falcon launched itself from the tiny ledge on the cliff and soared up into the blue sky. He swept around in a wide loop, his shadow passing quickly over the green and browned moorland below. His eyes scanned the ground for movement. Nothing stirred. The hills smiled quietly in the July sunshine. From the woods at their foot came the crooning of wood pigeons, the falcon's favourite food. But no bird flew from the trees. Disappointed, the peregrine flew back to the ledge. It sat there motionless, except for the constant flickering of its yellow eyes as they scanned the landscape. But the peregrine was wrong. There was someone about. About 50 metres from the top of Dumyat, just where the grass, bracken and heather ended and the grey rocks began, there was a tiny movement in a deep clump of gorse and fern. Gavin lay hidden. He'd been there for half an hour, breathless with excitement. He was watching the peregrine. From where he lay, he could look over the edge of a deep cleft in the hill. On the side facing him sat the falcon, its dark head, grey back and bared chest showing clearly. Gavin had seen the bird as he panted slowly to the top of the hill. Flopping to the ground, he had crawled slowly into the middle of the ferns until he was completely buried. Slowly parting the fronds, he had peered out. It was then that the peregrine began to swoop. Disappointed, Gavin lay still. He thought he'd been seen, but the bird returned to its ledge. What a day I'm having, thought Gavin, and he lay back on the soft turf and gazed at the sun through the mottled green network of the bracken. It's a bit like being in the jungle, he thought. He ducked his head low and peered through the bracken stalks. There was nothing to be seen but a forest of brown stalks with a green canopy above, until it emerged into a dark mass. Gavin sighed. He did love Scotland. He had no idea there was such wild country anywhere in Britain. His expedition had been easy so far. He'd raced up the zigzag track on the front of the little hill that Aunt Elspeth had called Craigormas, but by the time he got near the crest, he began to pant. He stopped on the top for a rest, enjoying the fresh smell of the grass and closely examining the gorse bushes and clumps of fern for any new birds. Consulting his map, he hurried across the flat top of the hill towards a wooded glen that formed a deep cleft back into the hills. He did not stop until he entered the trees that bordered both sides of a rushing stream. A burn, they called it in Scotland. Gavin carefully picked his way across the stones and clambered up through the trees on the other side. Consulting his map again, he worked out that all he had to do now was to climb the slope in front of him and he would be nearly at the top of Dumyat. But when he cleared the trees, he realised that he still had a long way to go. The rocky peak of the hill still seemed blue and distant in the skyline. "I'll take 20 steps and then halt," thought Gavin, as his legs, unaccustomed to hill walking, began to ache. He clambered up 20 steps, paused while the ground swayed in front of his eyes, then counted another 20. In this fashion, panting and struggling, he mounted the steep, grassy slope. The skyline grew nearer. Gavin ignored it. It would be best if he kept his head down. Still concentrating on his bursts of 20 steps, he struggled on. Suddenly, he fell forward on the flat turf and he looked up. "I'm at the top," he thought with delight. It was then that he first saw the peregrine. He immediately dropped flat on his face, then crawled deep into the bracken. Gavin's breath gradually returned. Looking around, he discovered he was not at the top of the mountain, but on a grassy shoulder leading to it. "What now?" he thought to himself. "Where shall I start looking for the light?" He studied the hill. It all looked so different from near the top. Down at the house, he had examined his pencil mark and had been sure he would find the exact spot. But in this world of boulders, bracken and gorse, it could have been anywhere. The higher he got, the wilder the scenery became. Gavin came to a decision. "I'll climb to the top, then work my way down," he thought. "Even if I don't find anything, at least I will have something to tell Aunt Elspeth." He lurched to his feet. For the moment, he had forgotten about the falcon. With a squawk, it flung itself off the cliff and soared downwards. Entranced, Gavin watched the soaring flight. "It's like a jet plane," he thought to himself, admiring the speeding body and the cut-back streamlined wings. He watched it disappear around the side of a rocky shoulder. Then he peered more closely. Falling down one side of the rocks was a little burn, tumbling in creamy little falls to a wide pool, then running down the hill until it disappeared in the seamed and lined lower slopes. Beside the burn was a broad, flat stretch of grass. On it were 3 tiny figures seated around a fire. Gavin could see a thin thread of smoke rising up. It was too far to make out any details, but they seemed to be children. Gavin made up his mind. He would ask their help in searching the hill for the place where he had seen the mysterious light. He stood up. "Hi!" he shouted. His voice echoed back off the cliffs. Scores of jackdaws flew into the air, protesting loudly. The figures looked up, their faces small, pale dots. Gavin waved. "Hi! Hi!" he shouted again. They must see him, he thought. What with the echo and the jackdaws circling noisily overhead, they must spot him. He waved again, then the figures moved. 1 minute they'd been sitting around their fire, the next they were gone. Gavin blinked. Lying on his stomach, he gazed downwards. They must have run behind the long shoulder of rock that branched off from the hill and descended in bumps and knolls to the little green valley beside the burn. That clinched it. They must have had something to do with the light, he thought. Why else would they run away? He decided to go down to where he had last seen them. Getting to his feet, he hurried down the edge of the cliff, looking for a place to climb down. That is the end of chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed that.